Alba. They're ahead of President Biden's meeting with civil rights leaders in just a few hours. Also with me, Damon Hewitt. He is the president and executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. He'll be in that meeting with President Biden. Second, in Austin, Texas, NBC's Priscilla Thompson is at the State House there, where that special legislative session just kicked off a few seconds ago. Also with us from Austin, LaTosha Brown, co-founder of the group Black Voters Matter. Her group is at the Texas State Capitol with other activists today. But Monica, we'll start with you there at the White House. Democrats calling on this administration to do more, to say more on voting rights after defeats in Congress and at the Supreme Court. What's the plan for today's meeting?
This is why the president and the vice president wanted to host key leaders of these civil rights organizations. But I think one of the most notable things here, Craig, is that this is going to take place behind closed doors. And that's because I'm told there is a big question of what the strategy really is going to be going forward. So they're going to huddle, receive input from, of course, these stakeholders who have a lot to offer, and then try to determine what the next steps should be, because there is currently this impasse with legislation that has failed, even though it passed the House but didn't advance in the Senate. And of course, the president has said that what is happening at the state level in some of these places, particularly Texas, is quite frankly, in his words, un-American and wrong. And he has even said democracy is at stake here. So he even hinted in terms of the larger, broader strategy that he was going to tour the country talking about voting rights, giving a major speech. Neither of those have taken place yet, but instead we're going to see, before this meeting takes place, Vice President Harris speak on the issue at her alma mater, Howard University. So that's where we're going to look to clues in terms of what they may lay out as these potential next steps. But interestingly, in this meeting later at the White House this afternoon, it's not just going to be voting rights on the agenda. I'm told they're also going to be speaking about police reform and the current legislation that looks to be coming closer to an agreement in reality. But there are still some gaps that need to be bridged. So they're going to discuss all of this. And even though we won't see the president and vice president speak about this immediately after, we hope to hear from some of the people in that meeting about how it went. And then again, what the White House is going to determine is critical and most effective next, because many Democrats have called for the president to use his voice, to use the power of the White House more on this topic, when he's really put his political capital a bit more behind things like infrastructure in recent weeks and months. Craig.
Interesting to hear that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act is going to be on the agenda as well. Damon, that's a great segue to you, because you're going to be in that meeting at the White House in just a few hours. What are you going to tell the president? What are you going to tell the vice president today?
Well, we're going to tell the president, Craig, that this issue is urgent, that we're facing an emergency in Black communities and brown communities. It's not a partisan emergency, although I know that's how some people talk about it, how some people cover it. We need this president to see past the politics. He always talks about bipartisanship going past politics. Well, this is an important time because we need him to see the impact on actual real people, the people that we represent in our cases around the country, the people who are his constituents throughout the country, the people who helped get him elected. And so we hope to put that on his mind today.
Damon, is there something that this administration hasn't done that you would like to see them do?
Well, look, the pulpit is bully, but it could be bullier. Right. I think that there's been a somewhat of a very serious but measured tone. This administration has spoken through its Department of Justice, where you see the new leadership there has filed a lawsuit in Georgia. It's joined the party from the lawsuits that other groups like ours have filed at the Lawyers Committee and other organizations have filed in Georgia and elsewhere. But the pulpit can be bullier. And then there's also things that he can do behind the scenes that only he can uniquely do that we cannot. And we want to make sure he understands and we hear more about all the tools in his toolkit that he plans to use and deploy in this critical period, especially during this critical summer.
LaTosha, you recently told The Guardian about voting rights, quote, "The Republicans, they're putting everything to stop it. I need that to be matched with the same kind of passion and commitment and to be vocal. I have not seen the kind of response that makes me believe they're seeing this as a do-or-die moment for American democracy." How would you make the case to this administration? What more would you like to see and hear from the White House with regards to voting rights?
I think there's a couple of things. One, when we think about this is the most critical issue I think that is facing our country, because this isn't just about party politics. This is really about the undergirding of democracy. And so what I would like to see is literally every single moment, every time the president speaks, I think that there should be something said about the voter suppression efforts that are going on. We should see everything that we're going at this, as we did in the election. As we came out, we left everything on the field. I want to see all the political capital, be used towards this. I want to see the Democrats be Manchin and Sinema be literally brought up and literally being able to be pushed around this issue. I am not seeing the level of the urgency of what I am feeling and other voter advocates are feeling on the ground. As I'm here in Austin, Texas, there's an entire session, what I call a suppression session, that has been set up specifically as a key part of that is to pass a voter suppression bill. We're seeing this all around the country. I think this is the most critical moment, and I think this is going to be a defining moment in this administration's role. I think that the administration can do more. I think that they're doing several things. I'm glad that they're having these meetings. I'm glad that some of the other pieces are happening as well. But what I want to see is the kind of passion and the sense of urgency of now, of what this moment will mean for undergirding our democracy in this nation.
And as we're having this conversation on the left side of your screen, a live look at the special session that is now underway in Texas. This is the scene in Austin, that legislative session getting started literally just a few minutes ago. To remind our viewers of the context here, back in May, Democrats walked off the House floor to prevent a vote on a bill that would have restricted voting rights in that state. The state's Republican governor, Greg Abbott, said that he is calling this session for election integrity. He wants it to be a priority. Priscilla Thompson is covering it for us there. Priscilla, what should we expect in this session?
Well, Craig, in just a short while, Democratic leadership and many of those voting rights advocacy groups are going to come out on the front steps of the Capitol and talk about, discuss what they are calling the need to preserve voting rights and this battle that is about to get underway before they head back into that session. What I'm hearing from Democrats is that they have been holding strategy meetings leading up to this session, but that ultimately they are going to have to take it day by day. While, yes, they have said everything is on the table, the caucus has been told to be prepared for anything, they don't yet know exactly how all of this is going to go. What we do know is that Governor Abbott has laid out his agenda, his priorities. Of course, bills around voting and elections are on that agenda, but what that will actually look like remains to be seen. Overnight, House Bill 3 was filed, the first bill around voting and election rights that we're seeing. It has some of those provisions in it, similar to SB 7, which Democrats walked out on in May. So it bans overnight and drive-through voting. It also does not allow for election officials to send out unsolicited absentee ballot applications. That would now be a state felony. But Republican House leadership has signaled that while this is the first bill, it may not be the only. Take a listen to what the Republican House Speaker had to say.
Voter integrity is very broad, so that gives us a lot of leeway in what that looks like, and whether it's a big omnibus bill or several small bills. And I expect dozens, if not hundreds, of election bills probably to be filed.
So still in a bit of a wait-and-see mode here, but the lieutenant governor yesterday tweeting that he did expect the election bills to come quickly and that some of those could start being heard on the floor as early as this weekend. Craig?
All right, Priscilla Thompson there in the state capitol. LaTosha, you're there in Austin, as we mentioned, that walkout that we saw back in May, often described by activists as a moral victory, but delayed the vote, didn't necessarily stop it from coming up again. Beyond rallying, beyond applying public pressure, naming names, what strategies, LaTosha, are you calling on Democrats to employ to block new voting restrictions?
first thing that we need is we actually have a solution on the table right now for the People Act. In order to get that, we've seen that the Republicans have not been acting in any way that they want to. Matter of fact, they've been open about their obstructionists. We have to end the filibuster. I've not heard the president take a hard stand around ending the filibuster on this particular issue, because what we know, what we've seen come from the courts with the Brnovich decision, what we've seen in these state legislatures is we need federal legislation to protect the right of citizens to vote in this country. And we've given the Democrats, they have control of the House, the Senate, and the White House. And so we need to end the filibuster. They're going to have to end the filibuster specifically so that they can pass this legislation. I don't see any other way around it.
Damon, my colleague Hallie Jackson talked to Texas House Democratic Caucus Chair Chris Turner in the last 30 minutes. This was his warning.
We need help. Democrats in Texas being in the minority, we can only hold this back for so long. And it's not just Texas, as you know, other states. Well, we need strong federal voting rights legislation to protect all Americans' right to vote.
I mean, he essentially echoing what we just heard from LaTosha, Damon. If Congress remains inactive, if Democrats see losses in the courts, the White House can only do so much within the parameters of its power, defeat can be exhausting. I mean, how do you keep the fire lit on this critical issue?
Well, look, the civil rights, racial justice community, we've been resilient for decades. The people have been resilient for decades. That's not the issue, keeping our fires burning. LaTosha's out there. You know, we're moving this issue in the courts, on Capitol Hill, in the streets, and today in the White House. What we need is partners. I think, Chris Turner's right. We need partners. We need the White House to do everything that it can do to act as if this is an emergency, because frankly, it really is. If you look at the full regime of what's happening here, the Supreme Court has opened the door for more mayhem. It's opened the door and frankly invited more of the same kind of legislation we've seen in Arizona. It basically saying, well, it's not that discriminatory, so it's okay. It only hurts a few people, not the masses, so it's okay. If my vote's not counted, that's a problem. If your vote's not counted, that's a problem. So we need to address this problem. And look, this is a politically savvy trick that's happening in these state houses. We know that the margins are often razor thin, as we saw in Georgia when Senator Warnock was elected, right? You see relatively razor thin margins. So the idea is we're going to hurt a certain number of people just to give enough political advantage. To me, that's racially discriminatory. We hope the courts will agree with us, but there's a good chance they won't. So we have to turn to the legislature. And look, this is the time for the executive branch to make it clear, make it known to the legislature, to Congress, what is needed, what is required to actually act and make a difference here. This is time.
Damon Hewitt, Monica Alba, Priscilla Thompson, LaTosha Brown, a big thanks to all of you on this Thursday morning. An emotion.